When you see an image on your screen, maybe it's for your coursework, a photo from your phone, or even just a logo. It looks pretty simple, just pixels, right?
Yeah, seems that way on the surface.
But if you're studying IT or computer forensics, or honestly, if you're just curious about what's really going on inside your computer, you find out pretty fast that images are, well, anything but simple.
Definitely. They're complex data structures, and understanding them is absolutely vital if you're working with digital evidence or even just managing data effectively.
So why is digging into the nuts and bolts of graphics files so important?
Well, because every single digital image tells a story. And not just the picture itself, but, the data behind the picture, how it's stored, how it's structured.
Okay.
So for anyone investigating digital systems, whether you're looking for deleted files or maybe hidden information, knowing how to understand, find, and recover those images is, well, it's fundamental.
And that's exactly what we're digging into today. Think of this as your kind of shortcut to wrapping your head around the basics of recovering graphics files from digital sources.
Right.
We've basically pulled the key ideas for you from a really important textbook in this field, the chapter on recovering graphics files in the Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations, the 6th edition.
And our goal here is really to give you a clear picture, no pun intended, of the different kinds of graphics files, how their data gets stored, maybe compressed, and the actual forensic techniques people use to find them.
Even when they're deleted or damaged or sometimes hidden on purpose.
Exactly. Yeah, even then, it's, essential knowledge if you're planning to go into any field that deals with digital media like IT or forensics.
Yeah, honestly, before really looking into this source material, I didn't fully appreciate just how much complexity is packed into these things we see every single day. So let's start with the basics. We see images constantly, but digitally they're not all the same. What are the main types we need to know?
Okay, so the source breaks it down into 3 main kinds you'll generally run into: bitmap, vector, and metafile.
Bitmap, vector. Okay, I've heard those terms. Can you break them down simply? Like, what's the real difference?
Absolutely. So think of a bitmap image, like a grid, a map made of tiny little dots or squares called pixels.
Okay.
Each one of those pixels has a specific color assigned to it. A digital photo from your camera. That's a classic bitmap.
Right.
The source also mentions raster images. They're very similar, basically grids of pixels too, but often they store the data in rows, and they're often optimized for things like printing. The quality you get depends on, screen resolution, the software you're using, and importantly, how many bits of color data each pixel holds.
So if I zoom way in on a bitmap, like a photo, that's when it gets blocky.
Exactly. You see the individual squares because you're just making the existing pixels bigger. You're not adding any new detail.
Gotcha.
Vector graphics, though, are completely different. They don't store pixels at all. Instead, they use mathematical instructions to draw lines and shapes.
Math? For a picture? How? How does that actually work?
Well, instead of a grid of colors, the file stores calculations. Things like draw a line from this coordinate to that coordinate, or create a curve with these control points, or fill this shape with this color.
Ooh.
And because it's all math, you can resize vector images, think logos, illustrations made in programs like CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator. You can make them bigger or smaller, almost infinitely, without any loss of quality. The math just redraws it perfectly at the new size.
Wow, okay.
Plus, they often end up being smaller files compared to really high-resolution bitmaps.
That's a massive difference. So bitmaps are pixel grids, vectors are math equations.
Yeah.
Where do metafiles come in?
Metafiles basically combine the two. They can contain both bitmap elements and vector elements within the same file.
Oh, interesting. Best of both worlds? Or worst?
Well, maybe a bit of both. You get advantages and disadvantages. The vector parts will still scale beautifully, stay sharp when you enlarge them, but any bitmap parts inside that same metafile, they'll still get blocky if you blow them up too much.
Okay, that makes sense. So just knowing the file type tells you a lot about how the image is built and how it's going to behave.
Exactly. And that naturally leads us to how these different types are actually saved, which brings us to file formats. The source lists quite a few.
Right. I mean, the ones we see all the time are like JPEG and PNG. Those are standard bitmap formats. Yeah.
They are. Yep. Standard bitmap. The source also mentions others like GIF, TIFF, and the classic BMP.
Okay.
And for vector graphics, things like HPGL and DXF are mentioned as standard formats, often used in like CAD or technical drawing.
But I guess in the real world, especially doing analysis, you're going to run into formats that aren't so common. Maybe one's tied to specific software.
Oh, absolutely. That's where it can get tricky. The source points out you'll definitely encounter non-standard formats, things like TGA, which you might see in gaming or 3D work, RTL.PSD, that's the big one for Adobe Photoshop.
Right, Photoshop files.
.ai for Adobe Illustrator, FH11 from an older design program called Freehand SVG, which is scalable vector graphics, becoming really common on the web now.
And even older ones like PCX. And yeah, running into one of those when you're trying to examine data can definitely be a hurdle if your tools don't immediately recognize it.
So what do you do then? If you find a file, say, on a drive image, and it has some weird extension you've never seen before?
Well, the source suggests hitting the web. Use search engines like Google, of course, but also there are more specialized sites. Fileformat.info is a great one, extension.informer.com, or martinready.net GFX. These sites catalog thousands of formats and can help you figure out what the file is and maybe what software can open it.
That's handy. Okay, what about digital photos, like straight from a camera? They seem to have their own set of rules, don't they?
They really do. Especially cameras aimed at professionals or serious hobbyists. Many of them capture images in what's called a raw file format.
Raw, meaning like unprocessed, just the raw sensor data.
Exactly that. The source actually calls it a digital negative. It's pretty much the direct output from the camera's sensor with very minimal processing done inside the camera itself.
What's the point of that? The big advantage is image quality. You preserve the absolute maximum amount of data the sensor captured. Nothing's been thrown away or heavily processed by the camera's, internal computer yet.
Okay, so maximum quality. What's the downside?
The main drawback is that these raw formats are usually proprietary. Like, a Nikon RAW file is different from a Canon RAW file, which is different from a Sony one.
Ah, so you can't just open them with anything.
Pretty much. Your standard Windows Photos app or Mac Preview probably won't know what to do with them directly. You often need specific software from the camera maker or powerful photo editors like Lightroom or Capture One. And technically, you often have to perform a process called demosaicing first.
Demosaicing?
Yeah, it's basically converting that raw sensor pattern data into a standard viewable color image format, like a JPEG or a TIFF.
Wow. Okay, so even just getting the photo off the camera involves more steps than you'd think.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard the term Exif data thrown around a lot with digital photos. What exactly is that, and why does it matter for, say, an investigation?
Right, Exif, it stands for Exchangeable Image File Format, and it's basically a standard way to embed metadata inside the image file itself, specifically common with JPEGs and TIFFs from digital cameras.
Metadata. So data about the data, information about the picture, not the picture itself.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really interesting from a forensic perspective. The source really highlights its value. Exif data can automatically log things like, the make and model of the camera or phone that took the picture, maybe even the lens used.
Wow.
The exact date and time it was taken, shutter speed, aperture, ISO settings, and sometimes, if the device has GPS, the actual geographic coordinates where the photo was taken.
Whoa, GPS too. That seems incredibly useful for building a case or just understanding the context of an image. Where is this data stored?
It's typically stored right at the beginning of the file, sort of in the header area.
Are there specific tools analysts use to get at that Exif data?
Yes, absolutely. Forensic suites like Autopsy often have modules to parse and display it. And there are also dedicated standalone tools. The source mentions one called Exif Reader, designed specifically to pull out all that metadata for examination.
Okay, but you mentioned date and time. I've heard that timestamp data can sometimes be unreliable. Can it be wrong or changed?
That's a really critical point, and yes, the source is clear about this. While Exif timestamps are often accurate and useful, they can be wrong. Maybe the camera's clock was never set correctly, or maybe someone intentionally altered the metadata later. Because of that potential unreliability, the source recommends that date and time information from Exif should be treated as subjective evidence in any formal report. It's a clue, maybe a strong one, but you really want other evidence to back it up.
That makes sense. It really highlights that challenge in digital forensics, always questioning the reliability of the data you find.
Definitely. Now, thinking about these files, especially high-resolution photos or detailed graphics, they can get really big, right? File size can be an issue.
Yeah, definitely. So that must be where compression comes into play.
Exactly. Compression is crucial for making these files practical to store and send over networks. The source basically describes it as coding the data from a larger form into a smaller one. And for images, there are two main approaches: lossless and lossy.
Okay, lossless. That sounds like you don't lose anything. Like when you zip up a bunch of documents, you can unzip them and they're exactly the same.
That's precisely the idea. Lossless compression uses clever algorithms. The source mentions things like Huffman or LZW coding to find patterns and redundancy in the data and represent it more efficiently, but without permanently throwing any information away.
So you get the exact original image back when you decompress it.
Bit for bit, yes. Image formats like GIF and PNG use lossless compression. And yeah, your general-purpose compression tools like WinZip, PKZip, StuffIt, FreeZip, those are all examples of lossless compression too.
Okay. And Lossy. The name kind of gives away you lose something.
You do. Lossy compression achieves much, much smaller file sizes, but it does it by permanently discarding some of the image data. It tries to throw away data that the human eye is less likely to notice.
How does it decide what to discard?
It uses different algorithms. The source mentions one called vector quantization, or VQ, but the most common format using lossy compression is JPEG. It's fantastic for photographs because it can make the file significantly smaller, which is great for websites or emailing.
But there's a cost, right?
There is.
Well,
Because data is permanently lost, there's always some reduction in image quality compared to the original. Usually it's subtle, especially at lower compression levels. But if you compress a JPEG too much, you'll start to see artifacts, like blockiness or weird colors. The source also lists SillyZip as an example tool for lossy compression.
so whether a file uses lossless or lossy compression fundamentally changes what you might be able to recover later and the pristine quality of it. That's vital in forensics.
Absolutely critical. It's just another layer of complexity you have to understand when you're analyzing these files.
Okay, let's pivot a bit now towards the real detective work. Say you're analyzing a hard drive image, maybe from a computer involved in a case. Someone might have deleted photos, or maybe the drive is damaged. How do forensic tools actually go about finding and recovering those graphics files?
Right. This is where specialized forensic techniques are essential. You're often not just looking at the file system anymore, but at the raw data on the disk itself. A key technique is called carving, sometimes referred to as salvaging.
Carving. Sounds like you're digging something out.
That's a pretty good way to think about it. You're essentially scanning through the raw data, especially in what's called unallocated space parts of the drive, that the operating system thinks are empty, but might still contain fragments of deleted files.
Because deleting doesn't usually wipe the data immediately, right?
Exactly. It just marks the space as available. So carving tools scan this raw data looking for known patterns, specifically the unique byte sequences that mark the beginning, or header, and sometimes the end or footer of specific file types, like the signature for a JPEG or a PNG file.
So it finds the start, finds the end, and pulls out the data in between.
That's the basic idea. Even if the file's entry in the file system table is gone, the data might still be there, and carving can find it. Tools like Autopsy, which we mentioned earlier, are really good at automating this process for many common file types.
Okay, but what if the file header itself, that starting pattern the tool is looking for, is damaged or partly overwritten? Can you still recover anything?
That makes it much harder, definitely. But sometimes not impossible. The source explains that you might still be able to identify fragments of a known header.
Okay.
And in some cases, if you have a good understanding of the file structure, you can actually attempt to manually repair a damaged header.
Manually. How?
Using a hexadecimal editor, the source mentions WinHex as an example. You'd look at the raw bytes of the damaged header, compare it to the structure of a known good header for that same file type, and literally type in the correct hexadecimal values to fix the damaged parts.
Wow. Okay, that's really getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
That requires some serious low-level understanding.
It absolutely does. And then there's the issue of fragmentation. What if the file wasn't stored in one nice continuous chunk on the disk?
Right. Files often get broken up into pieces, don't they?
They do, especially on older file systems or drives that have seen a lot of use. So if a graphics file is fragmented across several different non-contiguous clusters, recovery gets even more complex.
So how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
Well, the carving tool, or sometimes a manual analyst, needs to not only find all the individual fragments belonging to that file, but also figure out the correct order they go in.
That sounds like putting together a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box.
It can be a bit like that, yeah. Once you've hopefully identified all the pieces in their correct sequence, you copy those sectors out, stitch them together into a new recovery file. And even then, as we discussed, you might still need to repair the file header after you've assembled the pieces to make the image actually viewable by standard software. It's a painstaking process sometimes.
It really sounds like it. Now, here's where things get maybe even more interesting, almost spy novel territory. Images aren't always just images, are they? They can be used to hide other things.
That's right. That's the whole field of steganography. Basically, the art and science of hiding information inside other seemingly innocent data, like an image file.
Hiding data in a picture. How?
This source talks about two main approaches: insertion and substitution.
Insertion.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like you just kind of stick the secret data somewhere in the image file.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. With insertion steganography, you might embed the hidden data, say, after the end of the actual image data, or maybe in some unused space within the file structure. When you open the image normally with a photo viewer, you just see the picture. The hidden data isn't displayed.
So how do you find it?
You'd have to analyze the file structure very carefully, often with specialized tools, looking for anomalies or chunks of data that don't seem to belong to the image itself.
Okay, that's insertion. What about substitution? That sounds like you're replacing something.
Exactly. Substitution steganography works by actually replacing some of the original image data bits with the bits of the secret message you want to hide.
Wouldn't that mess up the picture?
It could, if done crudely. But often it targets what are called the least significant bits, the LSBs. In a byte of data representing color, the LSB is the bit that has the smallest impact on the overall value, and thus the color.
Ah, so changing just the very last bit in the color data for a pixel doesn't really change the visual color very much.
Precisely. If done carefully, you can embed quite a bit of data by tweaking the LSBs across thousands or millions of pixels, and the change to the overall image might be completely imperceptible to the human eye. The hidden data is there, but you can't see it just by looking.
So again, you need special tools to even know if steganography has been used, let alone get the hidden data out.
You absolutely do. These are often called steganalysis tools or steg tools. The source does warn, though, that running these tools can be very time-consuming, especially on large data sets. And if the steganography was done using a sophisticated method or strong encryption,
It might be impossible to detect or recover.
it can be very, very difficult, sometimes effectively impossible, yes. But these steg tools aren't just for finding hidden messages. They can also be useful for other things, like detecting subtle manipulations in an image that might indicate tampering, or even just identifying a file's true format if someone tried to disguise it by changing the file extension, or confirming if a file that looks like an image actually contains valid image data.
It's really fascinating how much can be going on beneath the surface of what just looks like a regular picture file.
Yeah, it really is. And there's one more really crucial aspect we need to touch on when dealing with graphics files, especially if you're doing this professionally, like in forensics. Copyright.
Ah, right. Who actually owns the image?
Exactly. Who created it, who holds the rights to copy it, distribute it, display it. This can be a significant legal issue. Interestingly, the source mentions that steganography itself can actually be used for copyright protection.
How so?
By embedding invisible digital watermarks into the image data to prove ownership or track usage. But from an investigator's point of view, the main thing is being cautious. When you recover images as part of an investigation, you have to be mindful that you might not have the legal right to just use or distribute those images freely. You need to avoid potential copyright conflicts.
So just because you find a picture on a suspect's computer doesn't automatically give you or law enforcement the right to, say, publish it in a report or share it widely?
Absolutely not. You have to consider the legal framework around copyright. The source points to resources like www.copyright.gov for U.S. law. And it makes a really important point. The source explicitly states there is actually no such thing as a single unified international copyright law.
Really? No international standard?
Nope. It's handled differently country by country. Treaties exist, like the Berne Convention, but the specific laws and enforcement vary.
That's a super important detail, especially now with data crossing borders so easily. It adds a whole other layer of legal complexity on top of all the technical challenges we've talked about.
Wow. We have definitely covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, drawing heavily on that Guide to Computer Forensics chapter. We started with the basics, the fundamental types: bitmap, vector, metafile.
Right, and the different file formats they use, both the common ones like JPEG and PNG, and those less common non-standard ones you might run into.
Then we looked at how data compression works, the difference between lossless, where you get everything back, and lossy, where you sacrifice some data for smaller size.
And we really got into the forensic side, how tools carve out deleted files from unallocated space, the challenge of repairing damaged headers, sometimes manually.
Yeah, that hex editing sounds intense. And piecing together fragmented files like a digital jigsaw puzzle.
Then we touched on steganography, hiding data right inside the image itself using insertion or substitution, like fiddling with those least significant bits. And finally, that crucial reminder about copyright. Just because you find it doesn't mean you can use it freely, and the fact that copyright law varies internationally.
Yeah, understanding all these pieces, the file structures, the recovery techniques, the tools, the potential hidden layers, and the legal context, it's really indispensable knowledge if you're heading into IT, cybersecurity, digital forensics, or really any field dealing with digital media today.
It really drives home the point that what looks like just a simple picture on a screen is actually a pretty sophisticated data object packed with layers of information, potential evidence, and maybe even hidden secrets.
It really is. The more you peel back the layers of the digital world, the more complexity and depth you find.
Definitely. So thinking about everything we've discussed, the sheer volume of images being created and shared online every single second, the different ways they're structured and compressed, the methods for recovering them even when damaged or deleted, the potential for steganography, the tangle of copyright laws across borders, what other unexpected technical hurdles or maybe unforeseen legal challenges or even broader societal implications might investigators run into as image technology keeps getting more advanced and even more woven into the fabric of our digital lives.